What's up, class? Welcome back to another lecture series with Mrs. Cose. You guys actually just completed a test, so we're starting a brand new unit, and we're starting with the endocrine system. But before we dive in, I have something really excited to show you. We do not have Landon here today, but we have two very special guests. They're probably your favorite teachers, I'm not going to lie. So we have, firstly, give a round of applause for Mrs. Minato. Yeah. And number two is Mr. Hammond. Are you kidding me? Look at this star-studded lineup. All right, let me make sure that's lined back up. Perfect. All right, today we're going to be talking about the endocrine system. So, Mrs. Minato, Mr. Hammond, the endocrine system has everything to do about hormones. So, what comes to mind when you think of hormones, and do you know any? What just comes off the top of your head when you think hormones?
Makes you emotional.
Emotional, like, oh, I'm being hormonal, like at the end of our menstrual cycle, we're about to shed our uterine lining, we get hormonal because we get this big drop in hormones. Do we know any other hormones?
I just think of the difference between girls and guys, that's all.
Difference between girls and guys, right. Men have a lot more testosterone than girls. Girls have more progesterone, estrogen as their gonadal hormones, which, glad Mr. Hammond brought it up because we just talked about that in the reproductive system. So, great stuff. All right, good start. Now, have you guys ever heard of the story, The Tortoise and the Hare?
Yes.
What happens in that story?
The tortoise takes off, but then ends up losing the race because it gets
Or
distracted.
not the tortoise.
Not the tortoise.
The hare.
The hare.
Yes. See, she was just testing us. She was testing us.
That's right.
The hare takes off at the beginning, gets tired, ends up losing. The tortoise is super slow at the start, and so he goes at a steady pace and ends up winning the race. I bring up the story of the tortoise and the hare because our body actually has two main ways of sending information or signals throughout your entire body. And one of them is a lot like the tortoise, and one of them is a lot like the hare. So, can you guys think of any way, like in your head, that you know our body sends signals or messages in our body?
Nerves?
Our nerves, yes, let's go. Our nerves are like one of the main ways. So our nervous system, it's based off of our neurons, and we're sending electrical signals to very specific cells throughout our body. And then another type of information signaling that we're sending, which we just brought up,
Hormones.
our hormones. Yeah, let's go, 2 for 2. So, do you guys think hormones are more like the tortoise or more like the hare versus nerves?
The tortoise.
Tortoise, totally. So, the hare is more like our nervous system. So this is a GIF of a neuron firing an electrical signal. The signal is contained within the cell itself, in the neuron. So it's really fast. It happens within like milliseconds. We don't even know what's going on, and it's very targeted. But our hormones, inversely, are, they actually are, oh yeah, so actually I showed you the two different impulses that we send. So the neuron has the electrical impulses, and then in between the neurons have neurotransmitters, which are also chemical signals, but they are reuptake really fast. On the endocrine side, we have hormones, which are chemical messengers. They're slower than a neuronal impulse, but they're more widespread and long-lasting. So the nervous system does it fast, but it's over quickly. Hormone can act for up to days and weeks on your body. And this is a little GIF of the hormones actually having to go through the bloodstream to be transported, right? They're not contained within a cell. They have to go to a bloodstream to then go and affect other cells and tissues in your body. So, the question is, Ms. Cose, why is the endocrine so much slower? And we already started touching on that. It's because we have to actually travel through the bloodstream to send that signal to get to where we want to be. Then, once we get to the place we want to be in our body, we leave the bloodstream and we bind to little receptors on a cell. So if a cell looks like this, we might have a receptor for a certain hormone, like you brought up testosterone earlier. Testosterone would bind to this testosterone receptor and then influence change in the cell. So that's what we're bringing up, triggering cellular change. So the question then is, how does this work? What do you mean by cellular change, Miss Cose? You just did little squiggles in a circle. Like, what does that actually mean? So we'll briefly go over that. Firstly, is we have two types of hormones in our body. The first type is called a peptide hormone, and the second type is called a steroid hormone. So I have a question. Maybe you can use your context clues of things you've heard or known before. But what do you think peptide hormones are made of, and what do you think steroid hormones are made of? What do you think of the word peptide? What do you think of?
Dr. Pepper.
Dr. Pepper, let's go. We'll take it. Have you ever heard of people supplementing like with peptides? Have you heard of that?
Wellness.
What?
Make Wellness is a new company that sells
Yes.
peptides.
Yes. Do you know what those supplements help with? Okay. Peptides, the word pep is the root word for protein or amino acid in our body. So with the peptide supplementation that's kind of coming up a lot, it's to help like muscle growth basically. So the peptide hormones are made of amino acids or proteins, right? Steroid has the root word sterol in it, like cholesterol. What do you think that's made of? When you think cholesterol, what do you think of?
Blocking the arteries.
Blocking the arteries, 100%. He can teach us about that because that's a good connection. Is like how cholesterol in our bloodstream will build up plaque, cause heart disease. But what food type do we think of when we think cholesterol? Oh, I want to lower my cholesterol. I gotta eliminate fatty foods, fats. Exactly. Look, they already got it. They're not even in our lectures, and they can get to this. So peptides are made of proteins, amino acids. Steroids are made of fats. This is super significant because what they're made up of determines their function in a cell, and we'll explain that. So peptide hormones are made of amino acids, like we said, and this means that they're hydrophilic. Oh gosh, what does that word mean? What does hydro mean? Water. Philic as opposed to phobic, what do you think hydrophilic means?
Attracted.
Yeah, attracted to water or water loving. Steroid hormones are hydrophobic. Phobias are like, oh, I'm scared of that. So they're water hating. They hate water. They can't dissolve in water. In peptide hormones versus steroid hormones, peptide hormones, their receptor, like I showed here, is on the cell surface. So for a peptide hormone, they can come in and bind to the outside of the cell. But uniquely enough, for a steroid, their receptor could be in the nucleus or in the cytoplasm of a cell. So this is peculiar. Like, why is there, the question would be, why are the receptors for these two different hormones in different places? And it has to do with them being hydrophobic and hydrophilic. I gave a hint up here with the cell membrane. Do you want me to give you another hint? The other hint is this. Our cell membrane is made up of fat. And usually things can travel with like things. So like something made of protein can travel in a hydrophilic situation, something that likes water. So our bloodstream, it can travel easily. So why do you think the receptors for hormones are in different places?
Because the steroids want to go through the fat.
Yes, let's go. The steroids can cross our cell membrane. So if a peptide hormone tried to go in and tried to go into the nucleus to affect it, it couldn't, because that lipid bilayer of the cell membrane would block it. Nope, sorry, you can't come in. So its receptor has to be on the outside. But a steroid hormone can pass through easily because it's hydrophobic. It's just like the cell membrane. It can pass through and bind to a receptor in the cytoplasm, or our nucleus has another cell membrane. It can pass through and affect the genes that are in the nucleus, the actual DNA. So this determines what peptide, we just explained this. This determines what they can do. So peptide hormones, because they only bind to the outside of a cell, they have more immediate regulation. What do I mean by that? So for example, have you guys heard of the hormone insulin?
Yes.
How have you heard that? In what context have you heard of insulin?
Diabetes.
Diabetics. Diabetics have to take insulin. Do you know what that does? Why? Like, when do diabetics need to take insulin?
When they
with their
eat
little
sugar.
pump. When?
When they eat sugar.
When they eat sugar. Okay, so then there's a connection between insulin and sugar intake. Do you guys know what that connection is?
No.
Let me teach you. Let's go. So, when we eat food, sugar is then absorbed by our intestines, and that sugar is put into our bloodstream. When the sugar is now in the bloodstream, we want a way to get it into the cells so that the cells can use it for the different functions of the cell. What insulin does as a hormone is it binds to a cell, let's say a muscle cell, like let's say Kevin or Mr. Hammond, you're like working out and you're exercising, so your cells, your muscular cells need more energy, they need more sugar. Insulin would come in and bind to one of your muscle cells and actually open up a channel for the sugar to come into the cell and fuel your muscle as you're working out. So this is what insulin does as a peptide hormone. It binds to the outside of the cell, opening up a channel for sugar to get into the cells out of the bloodstream so you can use it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's a part of our metabolism. That's why diabetes need insulin, because they've become, actually, next class period, we'll go through the whole mechanism of diabetes, but we'll touch on that because it's exciting. All right, let's talk then about a steroid hormone. So steroid hormones have long-term gene regulation effects. What's a gene?
You get it from your parents?
We get it from our parents. Genes are a part of our DNA, right? DNA is like a cookbook for anything that needs to be made in our body. And each gene codes for something different, like a different protein. So like maybe I'm gonna make a protein for my eye, so I have the eye color brown or blue, right? So what steroid hormones can do is they can actually go across the membranes of our cells, so with the cell membrane and the nuclear membrane, go into our DNA and tell our DNA to start making the proteins from the recipe, which is crazy. Like, this is a really big deal. So let me give you an example of this because it feels kind of vague. One of our steroid hormones is called testosterone. When we think of testosterone, we think of like steroids, right? Oh, I'm gonna take like anabolic steroids because they're synthetic testosterone and I'm gonna get big, I'm gonna get yoked. How that works is testosterone can travel across cell membranes of muscle cells, go into the nucleus and actually say, let's make more actin and myosin filaments. You guys aren't gonna know what that is, but you guys are, because we've been through the sliding filament model. The way that a muscle actually contracts is these filaments slide across each other and bind, and then they pull, like contract your muscle. So what testosterone does is it goes in and it increases that muscle synthesis, increases actin and myosin, so more little guys can grab, which makes your muscles stronger. So that's the difference on how these two things work. Peptide hormones bind to the outside, it's kind of quicker. Steroid hormone travels all the way to the inside and can regulate genes. So it's a long-lasting effect. So then the question is, now that I know all this cool stuff about hormones, what part of the body decides when hormones are to be released? What do you guys think? What part of our body would decide when certain hormones are released?
Your brain?
Our brain, exactly, our brain. Because our brain is our control center, right? It processes when and what, it regulates our body. So the part of our brain that does this is called the hypothalamus. This is like the mob boss of the endocrine system, of the hormones. The reason why I call it the mob boss, and here it is right here. Students, you'll know where this is, because when we went over brain anatomy, we went over the hypothalamus. So this is the thalamus, right below it, it's hypothalamus, because the root hypo means below or under, right? So hypothalamus is just this entire section right here. Its job is to maintain homeostasis by monitoring the body and coordinating the hormone response. So just like the Godfather would monitor what's going on in the city, then decides what needs to be done or who needs to be taken out, the hypothalamus does the same thing but for hormones. So then the question is, what's homeostasis? What does that word mean?
Isn't that when everything's in the balance?
Exactly. Homeostasis means the condition or maintenance of a stable internal environment. If our body was going like this all the time, that's going to make us code out. Like that's going to be code blue for us. So we're trying to maintain a stable internal environment. What are some types of functions, processes, or aspects of our body that you think need to be monitored or stabilized by the hypothalamus? Like what are some things in our body that need to be kept at a constant? And when they go above or below, it's dangerous.
Heart?
Our heart, like our heart rate. We need to regulate our heart rate. If our heart rate gets too high, we call that tachycardia. Like 180 out of nowhere just because I stood up. Oh no, that's a problem. What's another thing we have to monitor in our body? Keep at a steady rate.
Blood sugar.
Our blood sugar, exactly. So we just talked about insulin. Insulin and glucagon act as the hormones that regulate our blood sugar. Other things are like our temperature or blood pressure, heart rate. We brought this up. Fluid levels in our body. So when we're dehydrated or hydrated, our blood volume changes. All these things are regulated by the hypothalamus through different hormones. So the last thing we're going to do today, there's about 4 more slides left, is talk about how the hypothalamus actually affects change. And it's a really peculiar way. So have you guys ever done a scavenger hunt at any time in your life?
Yes.
Yeah? When was your scavenger hunt?
Well, the one I remember is the teacher scavenger hunt a couple years ago.
Yeah.
Okay, how does a scavenger hunt work?
We get a list of things we got to find and we got to go do it.
Okay. Have you guys had a scavenger hunt where you get one clue and you read it and then it makes you go to another location that has another clue? Mm-hmm. Have you done that? Have you done that, Lynn?
Yeah.
Okay, when was that one, Lynn?
It was when Luke was in 5th grade.
Okay.
His leg made up around the school scavenger hunt.
Yes, and it kind of feels redundant because at the end, what did Luke get?
Nothing. Just bragging rights.
Nothing. What? There was no prize at the end? Okay, well, one time my family put on a scavenger hunt like that. I think it was for someone's birthday party. And the end prize was at the beach. And they had dug this big, treasure chest into the sand at the beach. And we found the spot after going from location to location, from thing to thing. And then in the treasure chest, I think it was popsicles or something. And it was like, well, why do we go through all this hassle when you could have just given me the popsicles in the first place? This is how you're gonna feel when I tell you how our hormones are released. So keep in mind, our hormones are released a lot like a scavenger hunt. And at the end of this, I wanna ask you, why do you think it's done that way? Why is it so step-by-step systematic, just like a scavenger hunt? So what the hypothalamus does is it's right here in our body, right? Right below it is something called the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland is so important because the pituitary gland is our primary hormone gland. So the pituitary gland makes all these hormones and stores them. And the pituitary gland, once it's stimulated, can affect all these other parts of the body, which we call secondary hormone glands. So for example, the hypothalamus will talk to the pituitary. The pituitary will then send a hormone to stimulate, let's say, the testes to produce testosterone, right? It does that all throughout the body. Then the testes would produce testosterone, and then like we learned earlier, testosterone will then affect the cells. So it's like this big step-by-step thing with all these steps. Today, we're just gonna be covering the hypothalamus to pituitary gland relationship. Next lecture, we're gonna talk about these secondary hormone glands, but I want you to see the big picture. So, the pituitary gland, let's dive in, is the primary hormone gland. That's where all the hormones are released from. So they call it the master gland, this is where everything comes from. Its main function, as we said, is to release hormones that stimulate those secondary hormones like the testes or the ovaries or the adrenal glands. And then it will control bodily systems. The most important thing to know, though, about the pituitary gland, other than it being the master gland, is that it has 2 parts to it, an anterior part and a posterior part. Do you guys know what anterior and posterior mean? Front and back. Wow, let's go. We didn't even take our quizzes, our Latin quizzes. Anterior means toward the front, posterior means toward the back. So we have a front lobe of the pituitary gland and a back lobe. They have two different relationships with the hypothalamus. So our last two slides will just be the two different relationships. So, and I gave a list of hormones that the pituitary gland makes that we would know about. So growth hormone is the main one. When growth hormones release, this makes our muscles, our bones grow. It's super elevated when we're young, but it helps our body grow anything that it needs. So it's a big deal. Some other ones that my students may know about is thyroid stimulating hormone. This stimulates our thyroid in our neck to control our metabolism. Or follicle stimulating hormone. This is what causes ovulation in women because our eggs are stored in our ovaries. They're stored in a little house called a follicle. And when the follicle is stimulated, it matures the egg to then ovulate one time during the month. So the hypothalamus is going to interact with the anterior lobe of the pituitary gland. The way that the hypothalamus interacts with the anterior lobe, the front lobe of the pituitary gland, is it makes hormones that either inhibit or release the pituitary gland's hormones. Now this seems a little redundant, so let's explain. The hypothalamus, for example, do you guys remember one of the hormones the pituitary gland makes? I just gave you like 3 examples.
FSH.
FSH, yes. Do you remember any of the other ones? To get strong and big. Growth hormone. We're going to talk about growth hormone to explain what's going on here. So the pituitary gland makes hormones. The hypothalamus is going to release a hormone to the pituitary gland, like we're doing the scavenger hunt thing, to then let the pituitary gland release hormones. Or the hypothalamus is going to release a hormone that will keep it from releasing a hormone. So we're going to explain this with the growth hormone. The hypothalamus, the mob boss, releases a hormone called GHRH, the most redundant name ever. Growth hormone releasing hormone. What do you think this GHRH does?
Releases the growth hormone.
It causes the pituitary to release the growth hormone. It's literally named that. Growth hormone releasing hormone. It's like, come on guys, what are we doing? This hormone from the hypothalamus will interact with the pituitary gland and cause the anterior pituitary gland to release growth hormone out into our body's cells, secondary glands, etc. So this is how the hypothalamus will allow a pituitary gland to release a hormone. Because, right, it's the mob boss. It's going to control everything. Now, in the inverse of that, the hypothalamus will release a hormone called somatostatin. Not as obvious this time. Somatostatin is going to do the reverse effect of growth hormone releasing hormone. And it's going to inhibit, it's going to keep the anterior pituitary from releasing the growth hormone. So the way that the hypothalamus also is able to release a hormone to the pituitary gland to then release a hormone is there's these series of blood vessels, very small, because there's not a lot of blood vessel networks that are big in our brain, because our brain's really selective about what can come in and out. And so it'll just release it through this tiny system of blood vessels and go to the anterior pituitary. Luckily, we're almost done. Why do you think we have this redundancy in our endocrine system? Like, why do we complicate things? Why can't just like the hypothalamus just release everything and it's coming from one place? Why do we have to go hormone to hormone to hormone to hormone to finally affect change? What do you guys think?
Homeostasis.
Homeostasis. Why would it help homeostasis?
Prevent things from going crazy.
Yeah, okay, that's good. What do you think, Kevin?
I think of like leadership and delegating.
Yes.
You've got one leader, but the leader knows that different things have specialties.
Totally. Both of those answers are dead on. Let's see what I put here. You just did the delegating one. The pituitary gland can't sense anything. The hypothalamus is neural tissue. It's brain tissue. So it can actually sense and think. So it can delegate to the pituitary gland, which is just a producer of hormones. And also regulation. We said that this affects gene expression. This is a big deal. So we don't want to just have it be a flip of a switch. We want to make sure everything's set and lined up if we're going to affect gene expression. That's a big deal. All right, last bit. Now we're going to talk about how the hypothalamus interacts with the posterior lobe. So we already know how it works with the anterior lobe. But this one's a lot more simple. The posterior lobe stores and releases two hormones that the hypothalamus makes. The hypothalamus mob boss makes two hormones and puts it into the posterior gland, and then that gland releases it into the bloodstream. Those two hormones are ADH and oxytocin. Have you guys heard of oxytocin before? It's like the love hormone. Like if you give your friend a hug, oxytocin is released because it's the hormone of connection. It's also the hormone that causes breast milk production in a mother when she's trying to nurse her baby. We won't go into ADH because we're running out of time. But the last question I want to ask you to conclude this lecture is, sorry, if the hypothalamus is already making hormones, why doesn't it just release the ADH and oxytocin? Doesn't that bother you? It's like it just released all these other hormones to the pituitary gland. Why is it giving these two to the posterior pituitary and then they're releasing it out? What do you guys think? This one was a harder one.
Because they're better at it.
Somehow they are better at it. That's actually true. Somehow the posterior pituitary gland is better at it. Do you have any guesses, Lynn? I actually had to chat GPT this. I'm sorry. Sorry, world. But the reason why is because the posterior lobe is better at it, and here's how. Posterior lobe has better access to our bloodstream. Like we said before, the hypothalamus is deep inside the middle of our brain. It doesn't have a lot of access to the bloodstream. Furthermore, our brain has something called the blood-brain barrier. Have you guys heard of that term before? Okay, the blood-brain barrier is our brain is really selective on the blood that comes into the brain, because if a bacteria got in our brain and infected our brain cells, you would just die. It can infect our lungs and stuff, and we're fine, we'll take care of it, but our brain is precious. So there are these cells called glial cells. Students, you know about this. They have little feet, and they surround the blood cells so that nothing can leak in and out of the blood vessels of the brain. They call it a blood-brain barrier. So, the hypothalamus is in this blood-brain barrier. So it can't let anything get out in the same way that the blood vessels throughout our body can let things in and out, but our hypothalamus can't. So it has to give it to the posterior pituitary to then let it be in a blood vessel that can send out large amount of hormone. Does that make sense? Sweet. All right, so you guys just mastered the beginnings of the endocrine system. Can we give a round of applause for Lynn and Kevin for absolutely crushing? Let's go. Can't wait to see you guys next lecture.